In this video, we will be discussing the canvas element. So the canvas element is an HTML5 element, and it allows us to create graphics on screen without having to clutter up our HTML markup. So in this video, we'll be looking at how we can use JavaScript to interact with the canvas and add graphics to the canvas. So we'll be creating different shapes, we'll be drawing lines, and hopefully by the time we finish this video, you will see ways that you can add the canvas element into your projects. So I'm going to begin by adding a border around the canvas. So this will just allow us to see the canvas on the page. So it's a blank page we have set up in HTML. So I'm going to add a 1 pixel border, so a solid style border with a light gray background. So this is just some very basic CSS I'm adding. And you can see the outline here of the canvas, and you will notice that the canvas is wider than it is in height. So by default, the width I think is around 300 pixels and the height is 150 pixels. So we can modify that height and that width of the canvas, and we can do that directly by adding the attributes to the canvas element. So in this case, we can say the width is 500, and we'll also set the height to 500. So now we have a bigger canvas to work on. Now you can also do this in JavaScript, and I'm going to show you how to do that now. Now I should point out that in this video I am embedding the CSS and the JavaScript into the same file. This is not normally something I would recommend, but it's okay for a tutorial video just to keep everything in one place so it's easy to see what's happening. So let's begin by creating a function, and this function will handle everything that we do with the canvas. And I'm going to add the onload attribute to the body tag. Now if you're not familiar with this, it just tells the page to call this function once the page has finished loading. So once all the page has been finished loading, then it will execute this JavaScript code. So we'll call the setup canvas method. So the first thing I will do in here is select the canvas, and I'm going to do that using the document.getElementById. So this will select the element from our page, and using JavaScript we can directly manipulate the width and height of this canvas element. So in order to do that, we'll just call canvas.height, and I'm going to give it a really big number. Let's give it a height of 900 pixels, and we'll do the same for the width just to see quickly if this is working. And yes, we can see that it is filling up the height of the screen here. So I think it's a little bit bigger than we need, so 500 should be fine for this. But I just wanted to show that you can easily control the height and width from JavaScript itself. So the canvas element is not supported on all browsers. So with that in mind, we have to put a check in place to ensure that the browser can support working with the canvas element. So we can do that by calling canvas.getContext. Now if this getContext method is being understood, it should be returning a value of true. So that is a safe way for us to write our code and wrap it inside this if condition. This conditional statement will basically enable only the browsers that can support the canvas element. And that way then no errors will be returned via JavaScript. So what happens if you have a browser that doesn't support canvas? Well, we can simply place content inside of the canvas tag. And since the browser doesn't support the canvas tag, it will simply ignore the tag and render everything that's inside it. So that's an easy way to just have a fallback option in case you're using an old browser. But everything from about Internet Explorer 9 upwards is supporting the canvas. So now let's start interacting with this canvas. So I'm going to create a new variable. So I'm using a method here called getContext. This is a built-in function for interacting with the canvas. So it allows us to get the 2D element of the canvas and interact with it. So now that we have this assigned to the layout variable, we will call the canvas functions directly on that variable. So let's begin by creating a rectangle. So we'll call layout.fillRectangle. So the method name has been shortened, so it is spelled FILLRECT, but it is short for fill rectangle. And the first two values that is passed into this fill rectangle function is the x and y coordinates. And that is followed by the width and height of the rectangle that we want to create. So we can easily plot the points on the canvas as to where it goes. And I've just noticed a small error that I made here. I forgot to remove the brackets. We don't need them on that conditional statement. So we'll reload the page now, and we can see that we have got this rectangle shape. And the initial point on the canvas is 100 by 100. So that's 100 on both coordinates, and then is 200 pixels in width and height. So now let's try something a little bit different. Let's remove some of the rectangle we have created. So we can use the function clearRectangle, and this allows us to just remove from an existing rectangle. We also need to pass in the coordinates for this in the same way that we did to fill the first rectangle. We'll say the 200 pixels on the x-axis and 200 on the y-axis, and then we will create a width and height of 100 pixels. Once we reload here, we will see that it has modified the shape of our original rectangle. Now we've got this corner shape, so we can easily manipulate existing rectangles and shapes using this clearRectangle method. So far we've looked at filling rectangles and clearing space from rectangles, but this time we will change this to stroke rectangle, and what this does is simply put a stroke or a line around the rectangle. So in this case it just puts a line the whole way around the perimeter of the rectangle. And we can also overlap rectangles. So this time I'm going to change the coordinates, and we will have a filled rectangle. So it will be slightly more on both the x and y axis. So now we can see that we have two rectangles overlapping each other. So it's quite easy to add additional elements to this canvas and create something completely different from it without creating any markup. So we're just using JavaScript to generate these shapes within the canvas. So let's try something different now. Let's look at creating custom shapes using the path. So we'll create our own path, and we will use coordinates to define where we are drawing on the canvas. So we use this method called beginPath, and that allows us to plot our points on the canvas. So the first method I will call after this is moveTo. Now moveTo allows you to pinpoint where you're going to start on the canvas. You can think of it a bit like taking your pen on a piece of paper. We're saying whereabouts we want to start writing or where we want to draw. And then after that we will use the line2 method to draw a straight line. So in this case we are passing in two coordinates for the x and y axis. So it moves the line from that first point until the line2 point. So in this case I'm drawing a straight line on the y-axis. So this will be a vertical line going from 100 pixels down to 200 pixels. So normally after we draw a line on the canvas like this, we can call the fill method if we have multiple lines, and that will fill in the gap inside of the lines. But since we are just doing one line, we can use the stroke method. So that will just draw a single line. So to reload this, we'll see that we've got our line going on the y-axis. So I'm going to copy this line too, and this time I'm going to add a second line. Now what I want to do here is I want to create a triangle shape. So we want to draw the line to 200 pixels on the x-axis. But this time we want to bring it to 150 on the y-axis. So you can see here that we are getting a triangle shape, but I want to move the triangle to make it a little bit tighter, so I'm going to adjust the x-axis. So let's just change this value to 150. And that's looking pretty good. So now we just need to close out the triangle. So we can do this by adding a final line, which goes back to 100 pixels on both axes. And there we have our triangle. So this is like our play button in this example. So we can change this to the fill method, and you will see that the inside of the triangle is now filled with a black color. So this time I'm going to look a little bit closer at the move to method. So we've seen it used once in our code so far, but this is quite useful to actually move around the canvas and draw different shapes. So let's look at how we can use it in this way. So this time I'm going to go back to having one single line on the canvas going on the y-axis, but this time I want to create a second line going parallel to the first one. So let's look at how we can do that. So create another line that runs directly beside it, but just further across on the x-axis. So we'll say layout.moveTo, and this time we will set the x-axis to 200, and the y-axis will be the same. So we're going to start at the top. We're literally moving our cursor to the top, just 100 pixels across on the x-axis. And that line will go down to the bottom, which is running completely parallel to our first line. Now we can bring this a little bit closer to the first line, and that looks okay. And now what I want to do is put a line across the middle of these two lines. We'll separate this out. So the next line will be back to 100 pixels. And this one will be halfway on the y-axis, so that will be 150 pixels. And we'll draw the line across to 200 pixels. So we'll start here and go across to the right side. This one will be 150 on both axes. So now we have the letter H, and this is just a quick example of how we are moving around the canvas. You can see we start on the left side, going from top to bottom, and then on the right side we go top to bottom again, and then we move and we create a line across the middle. So now I'm going to create an additional line to the right of that. So this time we'll start at 200 pixels on the x-axis and 100 on the y. And our line 2 will go directly on the y-axis, so it'll go directly down on the y-axis. So 200, and this time 200 again. And we can see that we were able to write on the canvas in this way. So far we have created rectangles and drawn custom lines on the canvas, but this time let's look at creating a circle. So we can create a circle using the arc method, ARC, and this will take 6 values. So we pass in the x and y axis to begin drawing our circle. So that is the center point of the circle. So in this case our canvas size is 500 by 500 pixels. So we want to make it right in the center of the canvas. So we'll use 250 on both axes. And the third value is the radius. So this is determining what size our circle is. So in this example, I will set this to 100 pixels. And this is the beginning angle of the circle. So the fourth value is the beginning angle of the circle. And then finally, the end angle of the circle. And I don't want to go too deeply into the math here, but to create the circle, we use the math.pi and we times that by 2, and that will give us a full circle. And the final value in this method then is either a true or false value. So if we set this to true, it will create the circle in a clockwise motion. So we'll draw the circle in a clockwise motion, and if it's false, then it will go counterclockwise. So once we reload the page, we can see that we have this outline of a circle. So we've stroked the outline of the circle, and we can change the radius to make this circle even bigger. And now you will see that it is outside the bounds of the canvas. So let's bring this down to 200 pixels, and it should fill most of the canvas. So now what I want to do is include some shapes within this circle. But before we do that, let's look at how we can control the color of this circle. So I'm going to set the stroke color. So we can pass in a hex value or just a simple word. You can type the word yellow, or in this case I will use a hex value for yellow. And this should actually be stroke style. So we are using the stroke to outline the circle. In this case we set the color of that line to yellow. Now we could actually change this to a single word like I mentioned, and it would still work. And if we were to set this to the fill, this would fill the inside of the circle, but we would have to call the fill method instead of the stroke method. So now we've got the circle completely filled with color. So now I'm going to create another circle, but this time it will be inside the first circle that we created. We'll use the arc method again, and this time we'll set the axis a little bit further to the right. We'll say 350 pixels on both axes. We'll make the circle smaller this time. Like 30 pixels radius. We'll just copy this to create the full circle. Now you'll notice this time that the fill style is yellow, so we'll need to change this to be a different color so that we can see it against the background. I'm going to show you something here that we have missed, and I've done this intentionally just to show you how this works. But once we fill style like this, we need to close off the path. So once we call the fill on the arc, it will close the path that we are using, and then we'll have to open a new path. So we'll just copy this down from above. Once we reload the page, this should be working. So once you create a path like this and you are filling the color, it will close off the path automatically. Now it's a little bit different if you use the stroke method, but we'll look at that later. So I'm going to move this circle, the smaller one, up to the top left of the bigger circle. Okay. And we will copy this and create another one. Let's create a second circle, and we will move this one a little bit further across. I think you can see where I'm going with this. I'm trying to create two eyes and make this into a face. So now I also want to add a shape underneath for the mouth. Now this will be a semicircle, so we're not going to do a full circle this time. So let's look at how we can do that. So again, we will use the arc method. But let's create a new path first. So we have to remember when creating a circle that the axis that you provide is actually the center point of the circle. So you're actually drawing a circle around that point based on the radius. So in this case, I will set it to 250 pixels on the x-axis. So that's right in the middle of our canvas. And then we'll put it slightly further down in the middle on the y-axis. So this time you'll notice I'm only doing math.py. I'm not timesing it by 2. So if I just do pi by itself, it will give us a semicircle. So we'll not do a full circle. And I will leave this value as true for now, but I will show you how this works. So once we test this, it looks kind of funny at first, but we've forgotten to close off our previous path. So our eyes have disappeared, but we've got this kind of semicircle, and it looks like a sad face or an angry face, I don't know what. But we can flip that using the true or false value. So if we set that to false, it will flip to the other side. So let's try that again. And you can see it looks more like a smiley face now. And we'll correct the issue that we have. So the issue we have above is we forgot to call the fill method on those two circles. We just opened the new path before closing the old one. We also want to move the semicircle up on the y-axis. So instead of 350, we will change this. And it still looks a little bit high, but we can play around with this value to get it into a good position. I think that looks pretty good right now. And you can also notice that once you right-click on the canvas, you get this Save As option. You can actually save this as an image. It will download as a PNG file. So I did mention earlier in the video that when you use the stroke method, it doesn't automatically close the path. Now I'm going to show you an example of this and how we can do that. So let's go back to our code and we will change this to a stroke for the mouth. So the mouth will just be a stroke. It will do a line around this semicircle. So now we can see that there is just a semicircle with a line. And you'll notice at the top there is no line going across. Now if you do the fill method, it looks like there is a line at the top. And the reason for that is that the fill method will automatically close off the line for you. So it will close the path for you and then it will fill it in. However, the stroke method does not do that for you. It allows you to just do a single line. So it gives you a little bit more control, but if you want to close it, we can. So we are going to close off this semicircle by using the close path method. So we call that before we call the stroke method. And now once we reload, you will see that we've got this full line across the top. So I'm pretty happy with this so far. You could take it further by adding color for the mouth using the fill style. So that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully you guys have found this helpful. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And let me know in the comments if you want to see more JavaScript videos in the future. Other than that, have a great day ahead and I will see you all in the next video.